Hello and welcome. First of all, who are you?
I am Elio Faucheron. I am the main figurehead of the Eorzine archives. I mean, like it's interesting, right? Because I have
He's the prince.
the thing is, I technically have three other people who work with me. Niniri, who does written lore stuff and like will contribute, does end talkers with me and lore talks and stuff, but doesn't actively make a lot of the content. Issa, who's our like background technical expert, and Ray, who's our moderator and also helps me with like some production stuff sometimes. So like it's not right to say I'm the guy who does it, but also I do like most of the stuff. So
yeah.
Figurehead seems to have become the running operative term.
Okay. So we've collabed before. I'm a big fan of y'all's. I like the content you do.
You.
It is very hard to make lore content for Final Fantasy XIV, and so
There's
most of the time the answer is just not to do it. So it takes a pretty deep amount of conviction that that's what needs to get made for that to be where you put your effort. This is kind of a weird time in Final Fantasy XIV, just within the standard content cycle, the 0.0 to 0.55. This point in the cycle, each point in the cycle kind of has pros and cons. You haven't been around the game since ARR, but you've been around a while, and you've been creating content now for a little while. You guys have put out a lot of videos, and so
about
as
18
you do
months
that,
now.
what does as we go into point 3, which I predicted originally for the 10th, and then I got self-conscious about my spreadsheet, and I moved it up to the 3rd to be more in line with other people's predictions, and I was like, I think a lot of that makes sense. I should just trusted the math. It looks like
I think
it's
the
going to be the
10th.
10th.
I think it's
definitely
the 10th.
So we don't have a confirmed date yet, but like the Moogle Tombstone event tells me it's going to be the 10th because it's usually 29 days before the patch. So as we look at point 3, what does this portion of Endwalker's life cycle mean to you? Like, what are the pros and cons? What's the differences between it and like a 0.0 or a 0.2 or where you see a 0.5 being?
That's a really fun question, honestly. I think the thing is there's two realities. Like for me, there's the reality of a player and there's the reality of a content creator. Because as a content creator, the lull that is not only the patch content, right, the 4 months between, but also especially even the like 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, when it's going to be like not as many people are going to be around. It's going to be low key. Take that time it's awesome to have that time to be like, okay, if I want to go do something that's like non 6.x related, I have all the time in the world to like just go focus on what I want and not feel that pressure. So like as a content creator, I love the lull. As a player, it's what it means for me is I don't ever really fully take a break from 14. Like my play time will lessen, but I never like hardcore like, okay, I'm gonna be back for like 2 patches from now or something. So for me, it's mostly just the time to do things that I haven't completed that I've wanted to complete it. So if I want to do Palace of the Dead, if I want to get Heaven on High, Lone Hero, if I want to get all the mounts in the game, if I want to do something that's like, there's so many things to do and catch up on that for me, it's just simply I slot that in during that time. So it's basically the time to be more low-key about the game while still invested and to prioritize all those things that I don't want to have to worry about once I get to an expansion. You don't want to be thinking, should I be doing Heaven on High when Eureka Orthos comes out?
Right.
Like the next D dungeon.
Right. Yeah, I think at that point, I like it. I think that the community tends to be a little more intimate. From an analytics standpoint, right? Like there's the guy that's on screen who just has fun and effectively gets to play video games for a living. And then there's all the stuff that happens on the back end that makes that possible. And that guy has to look at like, okay, you had a chance to make 5 videos and you knew you were only going to get to make 1. Did you pick right? Like, I'm not telling you to make a video that's not on your list. Creative Chris can do whatever he wants. But like within the 5 that Creative Chris projected, did you pick correctly? And so like from a revenue and an analytics standpoint, like everything shifts during the 0.3 and it's a lot more intimate. So like watch time per viewer historically feels like it rises because it's only an engaged viewer. But the total number of views feels like you tend to struggle. And you're seeing that like platform wide right now, like what is Twitch doing and what is the directory doing? Dwarf Fortress launched yesterday and had more people watching it than there will likely be on 6.3 patch day. Now, Ultimate will come 2 weeks later. That'll have a ton of people, but there will be this weird lull. And so like the 0.3 patch for me does feel very intimate. I think that's the word that I consistently find myself falling back to, that it's only the people who want to be here, as opposed to like Endwalker. Some people are just here to be around all the other people. There's nothing wrong with that. There's something fun about being around a lot of people who are excited. But if you're here in like the days going into 0.3, you're here because you want to be. Like, it would be a really easy time to go play New Worlds 1.8 that just dropped, or go do all the living Season 1 stuff that's been in Guild Wars. Dragonflight just dropped, and that's just within MMORPGs. You look out at the rest of gaming, and there is just so much to enjoy. It would be a really great time to go do that, like you noted. Like, if you have a goal somewhere, go do that. Like, absolutely. But what that means, that all the people that are left, this is what they chose. They had their pick of everything in the world, and this is what they chose. And so as we look out at the story of this, 0.3 would historically be the end of an expansion story. But Endwalker shifted the formula. It delivered the finale already, and we have 0.1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to build into somewhere. So I want to ask you a series of questions about places.
Cool.
And then there's going to be a prediction at the end. So
let's do it.
Who lives in the New World? What's going on east of us?
Yeah. So the New World, the main groups that we know about are the Wallachui, the Mammal Jaw tribes. I mean, that really is the predominant groups that we know. We know other groups exist. But the only two that I can think of that we like really have, I mean, I guess if you're talking about going east, there is also the Sahagin that exist in the Indigo Deep, and the lengths to which they exist in the Indigo Deep just off of like the Lenosian shores versus further out, and like maybe even different Sahagin tribes, because we even see that in the Sahagin tribal quests. You see like different clutches, different spawning grounds. Those technically would be something that you could absolutely imagine seeing as part and parcel to going to the New World. Beyond that, we just don't know a lot. We have a lot of lore that we have comes from the vegetables. A lot of the lore that we have, there's implications that Alag may have stepped in there at some point, because there is a mammal jaw in the Crystal Tower, and the Crystal Tower was frozen underground, or it was frozen in time during the Third Astral Era, which means that either mammal jaw must have come to Eorzea, which there's no documented evidence that they did. That most of the evidence suggests that they came to the ones that we see in Lenosia came only during more recent eras. So maybe we could see Allagan things potentially.
Okay. So then if we go South Sea Isles and Meracydia, who do we run into?
So with that, we run into, so you run into Hyur, potentially Elizin, and potentially Ro, based off of, we look at the wording triad. You have Sophia, you've got Zervain, and you've got Sephiroth. Sephiroth, you've got the tree people, kind of like the tree people that you can see in Zadnor, in like one of the sections of Zadnor. There's like sentient tree people. Zervain, you have those like reptilian centaur guys, so we see those. They may have canonical names, but as far as I know, they're just like referred to as like Sephiroth's kith and kin and stuff. But with Sophia, you see like actually spoken races, and I believe you see an Elizin, a Hyur, a Rogadin. I think that's it. I think those are the only three races you see. I might be wrong about that, but so we would potentially think that we'd see that. It would also make sense, we know from Hurian migration patterns and the little bits that we get about the second astral era, I believe, of people moving into Meracydia. That makes sense. We would also get the dragons, because you have the Tiamat and Bahamut. Once ruled over Meracydia effectively, and their brood should still be there, at least partially, but it may not be, because all of them may have been trapped and put in Dalamud, because we know almost all of their brood was supposedly done. That was what happened to them, and we also know that many of what Meracydian dragons that might have been remaining were taken by Fandaniel and his crew and put in a tower, and that's how they created Lunar Bahamut. But there may still yet be more Meracydian dragons. And then I would also think that we'd probably see a lot of Void Scent there, because there's a lot of references towards the fallout of Alag and what they did during the Third Astral Era and the attack on Meracydia. So I would definitely think you'd see also Allagan chimeras. Probably you'd see remnants of those as well.
Okay. Now let's imagine we don't want to leave our shores, and we want to stay in Ilsabard, because it's not as filled out as Aldenard and Othard on either side. When we look at maybe the rest of Garlemald, when we look at Corvos, when we look at these places north of Thavnair, what all are we missing? Because there's a lot of clouds on that map.
Yeah. So we're missing that we know of. So we've been to Whirlit, but Whirlit is underneath that cloud cover. So that's worth noting. It's on the opposite side of the Gimlet Dark. So technically the westernmost edge of that cloud cover should be roughly where Whirlit is. Then you've got now Mask, which it was a country we don't really know anything about, but we know it's the closest geographical country to Garlemald. So it should be just due south somewhere, and there should be like a central Ilsabardian mountain range that goes somewhere in there. And we know now Mask is either on the south or north side of that. Then you have Corvos. We don't know the size of Corvos, but the anchorite of Corvos, basically across from Thavnair, you would see where Corvos roughly should be. But if it's huge and like takes up the entirety of that space, or if there's actually something else we don't know about, or now Mask reaches out in there, we don't know the shape of how each thing fits into each thing. We also know there's the Republic of Landis, which we don't know if that's just only a city-state or a larger nation. So the lengths to which, there's a couple places we know about for sure that exist in Ilsabard, but we don't know their size or scope. So it could be that those are everything, and there's only those things, and then there's just geographic features beyond that. Or there's like an entire other place that we like just haven't heard about at all. Because like there's references to Baja. Well, so like Baja is also weird because Baja is like both is in between Ilsabard and Othard as well. It's like the eastern side of Ilsabard underneath the cloud cover, kind of, because it's Zadnor doesn't seem to be where we look at when we see Othard. But Baja we knew about way ahead of time because we knew about it since I think as early as 1.0, but definitely 2.0. But
keep
then
in mind that Rodert was an unpaid explorer, so if Rodert didn't draw his map right, he didn't have a lot of resources.
Well, and that's the thing is that like for the past century it's been under occupation. So how
we've been managing a map from a guy that was alive a long time ago.
Yeah,
and that map was not fully updated post Calamity because I guess people have had other things going on.
Yeah,
it's been partially updated post Calamity, but it is not entirely up to date. So we can go in the world to places that are not in the map. So like that gets weird too with the scale of things.
Yes.
Now, we've been looking at these other shards, and when we first went to the first as a story skipper going into Shadowbringers, I thought, oh, cool. Then they could spin an expansion going to every single shard if they wanted to. What's left of the 13th? Is there a full expansion worth of maps in there? Is that...
No.
Is it just...
No, and...
What... Is it deleted, or is it an inverted world? Are we in, like, some weird...
So, okay. The first thing to explain about it is it's kind of metaphysics, which is if the first is umbrally aligned. So you think about the empty, right? And how it's just like all the aether is completely stilled. Everything is lifeless. It's like the burn, except for technically the burn is aetherless. But in the empty, the aether's still there. It's just so umbral that it just doesn't do anything. The 13th is astrally aligned. And so it's effectively, its aether has rendered itself apart to the extent that there is no ethereal sea. So the reason that, like, for instance, when Voidsent die, they don't die in the 13th, they just come back, is because there's nothing for them, there's no ethereal sea for them to return to. The only thing that could happen to them is they can be consumed by other Voidsents. The 13th shard, so effectively the physical space that's left with it is just a rent mass of what's left behind. Now, could that be rent mass be reclaimed, a la what we did with Eden in the empty? Potentially. I mean, I've theorized that for a long time. I mean, well into like even during just Shadowbringers. But the 13th, while not having, there's just no really feasible way, as far as we've been explained both in 6.x and prior lore, that there's an expansion's worth of land masses to explore there. What it does have is a very specific and interesting thing, which is that the walls between it and the other reflections and the source are weirdly weak. So, for instance, from the role quests, we know that the 13th there can be portals between the 13th and 1st with ease, and we know from Voidsent, and Void Terrors in our world, that there could be portals between the source and the 13th with ease. So what the 13th could be is a terminus to the other reflection.
So if you made an expansion out of it, you could be jumping instead of spending all time in the first, you could knock out 3 in one go. You could just jump to jump to jump.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, as we look out to the remainder of this expansion, we know we're getting more variant dungeons. We know we're getting more dungeons. So with 0.4 and 0.5, we expect a new variant dungeon and a new dungeon. Where do we go for those?
Okay.
And then where do we then jump off to in 7.0?
Yeah. Okay. So let's go with the dungeon first. So we've got, I'm forgetting what it's called already, but the obviously the Ceruleum Cavern in Garlemald is the 6.3 dungeon, right? Why we're going to Garlemald will be fascinating, whether there's a Void Tear in there, whether there's just something that's about us dealing with geopolitics and helping out with the Garleans or something. If that's the case, the thing I would say is I would not look to another Void or 13th dungeon, because we had obviously 6.2's dungeon. But if we're setting up the idea of the trans reflection capacity of the 13th, you can imagine that would be the story basically of the 6.x prepping for future stuff, which would mean that if you did that, let's say you execute that and allows you to like jump into the 7th shard or something in 6.4 like just for a second, and you do a dungeon there, that could be cool. Or if what's likely, and we're sticking with something that's more terrestrial, what I would imagine is that 7.0 is Meracydia. And if 7.0 is Meracydia, then I can imagine that the dungeons that we get will be more prep and set up for that. Now, what that would mean would then, I would imagine, other Ilsabard locales, potentially. So Corvos would obviously make a lot of sense, although I don't know if they want to do a Corvos dungeon without introducing Corvos as a map. But you could also imagine... Yeah, I mean, you could imagine a couple things, really. But if you imagine that Meracydia is 7.0, a lot of things fall into place. Because the thing about Meracydia is its legacy is tied to Voidsent, Dragon, and the legacy of Allag and Empire. And right now, 6.x is all about dragons, Voidsent, and the legacy and fallout of Empire. So, like, it just seems like thematically they're leading towards that.
Okay. That'd be exciting. I mean, we'll start to get teasers as we go post 0.4 into the fan fests. And so that's when they start really dropping lore.
Oh, and I didn't touch on variant dungeons. Did you want me to hit on that real quick?
Yes.
So variant dungeons, we've got a ton. We just got a ton of options. So the thing is, as much as we already have Palace of the Dead with Isam Sahar, we never actually went to oh my lordy, the Gridania progenitor or forebearer nation state. I'm all of a sudden forgetting. Temtar Deepcroft is one of its locales. Oh my god, why am I forgetting everything today?
What's over?
I'm sorry.
Amdapor? Is that what's over? There?
No. The Amdapor's 5th astral era. This is 6th astral era.
Way beyond me.
Yeah, Gelmora. I just it blinked for my head for a second. Okay. So we never went to the Gelmoran Capitol, and you actually go to Northern Shroud, you can see the Gelmoran entrance to the Gelmoran city proper. So the thing is, if you think about, we've had an Ul'dah variant dungeon, it makes sense to have the other 3 starting cities. I think as the first
dive
3
in Upper Bronze Lake, which means we can now go see all down into Tonberry Land around it. There's some cool lore and swimming around that.
It's interesting because most
spearfish down there.
Yeah, the thing about that is that the only thing there that we know of is the Wanderer's Palace. However, in Outer Lenosia, not instead of Upper Lenosia, but Outer Lenosia, you can see Nim, the city, the ruins of it as well. So one of the things is that could be it, but also importantly, you see it out in Ogamoro, which is the northern half of Vilbrand that we've never been to. Which is where the kobolds hang out. It's you see it in the 1.0 trailer. It's this a forest jungle, all sorts of mysteries and stuff go there. So that could be a wonderful variant dungeon as well. So that makes sense. You've got your Lenosian one there. You've got your Gridanian one now. We know if you did Gelmora. So boom, your first 3 starting cities.
Which makes sense because they told us there's 2 more, and they're going to continue updating Island Sanctuary, and then those systems are meant to carry. So then next expansion, we would be able to carry those into, maybe they go tackle something with Foundation or something like that.
Yeah, the variant system's super evergreen, so I mean they're setting themselves up for a good future.
I hope that the higher difficulty stuff starts to have different, like, Unreal type stuff where there's a seasonal element to it, so the different paths, because they built all those paths into the normal version, and then the top end version feels very, very static. And so unless the rewards are going to rotate, because the Savage rewards has been kind of a point of criticism on it, I think there's a lot to be leveraged there. As an initial trial in what it is, I think it's an immense success. Now the question is, like, where does it go from here as it matures into, like, another pillar of content within 14?
Yep.
So, it is December 7th. So I feel like
oh my god, it is.
And so when we look back, it's been a year. Final Fantasy 14 Endwalker released right at a year ago. What is kind of your favorite Final Fantasy 14 memory looking back?
Ooh, that's hard. It's funny because a year ago today, I had already finished the story of Endwalker because I had pre-orders. Obviously, I was like, I shot through it. I was done day 3. I was in Ultima Thule like on day 2 a.m. of day 3, and no one was there. But what was my favorite memory? Actually, speaking of that, maybe that was it. So I have there's two sides of it yet again, which is like the player in me. My favorite memory was arriving in Ultima Thule and narratively what that meant. And then also arriving there, and I experienced Ultima Thule completely solo because no one had gotten to that point yet. And so I thought, what I just thought was, when you're at the point in the story, it just makes it seem like there's no one there because that's makes sense for the story at that point, which made that entire moment incredibly meaningful and resonant, especially with the emotions of what that scene and story and is all about, both like holistically the entire thing, but also just that map. But like as from a community standpoint, I think for me, it's as not to be a cop out, but it's been like the growth of experiencing 14 as a social experience, because like my MMOs historically for me have been pretty not antisocial, but like I didn't have a lot of friends who played them, so it was a lot of times kind of a singular experience. And 14's been the first one where that's not been the case. And so do we just experience this game and the community around it? I think it's the myriad of small moments ultimately that has continued to grow my love for it. It's the little things.
Elpis was pretty groundbreaking.
Oh my god!
Asking to do something like that. I was really mad in the last zone of Endwalker in the Tempest that they didn't make that a tribal quest, that we didn't get a chance to spend time in Emmett's memories and spend more time around the ancients, because I just felt like I'm not done talking to you guys. And they're like, well, you are.
Yep.
And I was like, but I'm not though. And so and like, I know that's not a traditional definition of what a tribe is, but like, I still wanted quests there. I wanted repeatables. I wanted to spend time there. And like, the pixies were fine, and I like shooting beavers as much as the next person, but like, I wanted to go spend time in the Tempest, and that just wasn't where it went. So Elpis was really, really, really special.
Dude, the lore, the lore bombs that they be dropping with Elpis, like all over the place. If you're a lore nut, that place was, and still is, a trip. Like, whew.
So yeah, yeah, it's been a heck of a year. It's been a heck of a year.
Yes.
So right now, if you got to kind of recommend a portion of the game to somebody, they're willing to put any amount of time and effort to get there, what do you think like the strongest component of Final Fantasy is? Because the story's kind of wrapped up, and so for a lot of people, they feel that the story's kind of in a lull right now, unless your plan is to go back and take on all the story up to Endwalker and then stop. Like, what do you feel the strongest thing about Final Fantasy is kind of looking forward?
So setting aside the narrative component?
Yeah, because I think it's kind of it's a completed chapter, so you could go binge it like a TV show now, and we're kind of waiting for the next saga to kind of really pour some gasoline on the fire.
I think it depends. So I mean, you know, it's the whole Bartle's taxonomy thing, right? Where you've got different people you've got achievers, you've got your killers, you got your socializers, you've got your, you know, explorers. Like, you know, for all that's limited, I think it like depends on what you want out of it, right? Like, I get a lot out of collecting every mount in the game, but I know other people like who want to sit around and limsa all day. So, you know, and I made friends with those people recently. A lot more friends who are those kind of people lately. But I guess I would say the strongest component also depends on if you're only coming around for patch or not. Because if you're coming around for patch, I think the strongest component is usually going to be like the new trial, the new raid. You know, whether it's the alliance raid or the raid is going to be one of the strongest things. But like, you know, Savage with weekly lockout, you know, that's only going to sustain you for so long. So then I think from there, it's about finding your own goals, whether that be you want to engage in RP or you want to engage in learning a lot about the lore, because there is an endless, you can learn constantly about the lore in this game every day for all of the patch cycle, and you will still be learning things, new things when the new expansion comes out. So I guess figuring out what you're driven by and then going for that is usually like my aim. You know, it's like what do I care about and what do I not, and then setting aside what I don't. And then once I finish everything I care about, then taking a second look at what I do care, what I maybe was less interested in, like Golden Saucer. I'm usually not like a person for like things like the Golden Saucer, but I've been really enjoying it.
Do you use Lala achievements?
I use FFXIV Collect, which is basically the same thing.
No. So your ranking on FFXIV Collect is only against other people that have been ranked.
Oh, see, I don't check the rankings. I don't. I can't look at that stuff. That stuff drives me crazy.
You want to see. So Lala achievements also sections out really cleanly things that are no longer achievable, and so it says like these are things that exist. You have some, you don't have some, but here's what is still achievable. And so it gives you a target that is reasonable. It's not reasonable to say, well, you should go back in time and become a feast champion. You can't. So Lala achievements, I ended up moving to that from XIV Collect because it also very cleanly sections out goals that I could still have, like things that I could still sit down today and begin working on, as opposed to things that I don't want to, like, because I can't. Like, there's no way to go back and do that. And so, like, you can still get the Diadem Pterodactyl, or the Restoration Pterodactyl. You won't, but you could. I'm
halfway there.
Are you? Touché.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's out there.
I'm going for all mounts, baby.
Yeah. What's your what's your character name?
Lendriel Shige. I think is the main that I have on there.
Landr.
Lendriel Shige.
G. All right,
you know, that's funny. Actually, I have FFXIV Collect. I guess the thing for me is I don't all I do is I just do exclude premium, exclude time limited, exclude unknown, and then like I've only ever had the list of like mini mounts it gives me. But then it's like also I only use it for like mounts and triple triad cards.
Okay, see if I can find it. So
I got a long way to go.
I've been enjoying it. I've been chasing down. My goal next year is to be in the top 25,000 global for total completion.
Okay, you know what? Now I gotta start using Lala achievements. Okay.
We'll see. But it does a better job of trying to pull everybody. It's still not perfect, but
I mean, but the fact that such like tools exist that people are put the time is just. You know,
WoW has a couple of them, and like some are user interface preference, but like Data for Azeroth tends to be the one that, like, if you want to be ranked, that's the one that tends to do the best overall job. But if you want to see like what recipes you are, there are cleaner UI ones out there that do a better job of just helping you go like work towards collecting all the recipes, but then you just ultimately feed that back into Data for Azeroth. And so my goal in WoW is to go be in the top 50,000 globally. For total account completion. Now, their total account completion, what they've done is they've assigned points to things, because WoW didn't make it super clear like what is a thing and what is not a thing. So like a mount is worth 100 points. Achievement points are worth 3 per point. And then because their pets can be leveled up, if you imagine your triple triad cards could be like made more rare and leveled up, they are a multiplier by their rarity and their level, which means that if they are max rarity, max level, that's 100 points like a mount, but you have to earn that. So
just Xbox 360 gaming score all over again.
It is. Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. And I cared about that back in the day until I lost my Xbox Live account.
I was the guy who went like, nah, I can't spend those points on anything. I just want to go play my game.
Yeah. It absolutely is. Okay. So as we look out at the next expansion, who's left to kill? Like, how do we not just have to invent the fact that, like, actually we were never in cosmic danger because now we're in the real cosmic danger? Like, MMOs as they age have trouble continuing to justify why we're not just god killers and continuing to create bigger and older gods. Or you feel really dumb. You go into the next zone and you're dying to a pig and you're like, didn't I just beat like Pandemonium? And it's like, well, the pig got you. Like, I don't. So, like, what do we do? Where do we go? Who do we kill?
So I actually think this is actually pretty easy to solve for 14. So one, the answer is you don't go bigger than Endwalker. You literally can't. You can't. But also,
I mean, you can. You just gotta make stuff up.
Yeah, you gotta make bullshit.
I'm starting to learn World of Warcraft lore, and we are rescuing the dragons who were aspects who ruled over the realms, who were given their power by the Titans to fight against like the old gods, and like you can just keep going, and it's like, oh, but the old gods were really at the behest of, and like you can just keep saying biglier and biglier until it's
what was it?
So
what was the jailer
up.
said? There's something more out there, like as he died. But no, with 14, I think it's an easy solve. First thing to remember that's worth remembering though is that we only beat Medion because of Dynamis. So that, like, not only, but like you like, we're not just, oh, we were super Omega Ultimate, super powerful, and what, you know, nothing should be able to challenge us.
We were built to be the right Pokemon type,
right?
To take
exactly. And so, well, and the confluence of Ultima Thule being a realm of Dynamis too, like there's just being that confluence of Dynamis there. So let's say it's Meracydia, right? The thing is, which you do have multiple things where you can do, where let's say we do open up portals to other reflections, but it turns out on one of those other reflections, what if there was an Allag analog, the same way there's like Ronka on the first, and what happens if Allag actually did take over the world and did just rule the world for the entirety of that time? Now you've just opened a portal to a reflection where it's just a full-on empire that now wants to conquer the source. You know, it's like you don't have, and their maybe their leader is like no more powerful than Emmett Selk was. Let's say that he was a particularly, you know, it's one of the shards of a Zem, and he's particularly powerful, but also he's kind of an asshole. But you know, let's say that's the case. You still then can make the problem and the threat, the existential threat of this incursion upon the source and the danger that all the other people of the source are in, and that conflict, rather than just, oh, we need to face someone that's so much more powerful than us, right? Because then it's a more interesting almost, because it's a complication of we're going on a journey to fight a broad threat, not just a singular individualized threat, like individualized entity as a threat.
Okay. Cool. And then, do you feel that everything's been paced appropriately getting up to that point? Like, content-wise, the patches have been like clockwork. But like, Do you feel that the game feels paced as we built to that?
I wish there had been an extra patch of us just doing shit, just like going on adventures and not like, because the problem, like, All Zadal was great because it's like, oh, we're going on an adventure, but immediately All Zadal led into, and now we're doing the Void, which is like great. Don't get me wrong, I've been like hyped and hoping we were doing the Void for fucking forever, and I was assuming we'd be doing it either like as like next patch content, next expansion or something, but like we're going straight from threat to threat, which is like, it's 14 to a T. And also we do a lot of like world building and other things outside the veneer of like the main MSQ. But like, a 6.1 that had been like a little bit of, you know, faffing about might not have been the worst.
Okay. There's a lot of content they could have made callbacks to. Like yes. The number of people who've never tried insert thing here, Chocobo Racing, whatever. They could have made a lot of callbacks. They could have introduced a new Golden Saucer game. There was an interview where he mentioned that they were interested in maybe putting snowboarding into the game. That could have all been paced very well.
Football someday.
If they re-released 1.0, would you play it? They've said they never would, but just as a hypothetical.
So are we imagining this being them releasing like classic WoW?
Yeah. That's the question. And when every time it's been asked of Yoshi, it's been asked a bunch of times over the years, especially since Classic has had success. I will tell you that his universal facial expression is it's just why would anybody want that? But would you play it?
Would I play it? Yes. But mostly for curiosity, lore. Like I have enough reasons to investigate it and to engage with it that are, even though it's a mechanical nightmare. And don't get me wrong, it is a mechanical nightmare. It's not a fun game. I have spent hours and hours and hours and hours watching that game. Yes, I technically did not play 1.0. I know 1.0. I can tell you 1.0 was not a good game. But would I absolutely engage with it because of the amount of things I could glean from that and the curiosities and like also content? Yeah. Yes, I would.
As opposed to Classic was a good game. Like they brought back something that was good for its time.
I don't know that you can make something. Yeah, like the thing is,
WoW
I don't think you can.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, dude. I mean, I played
like,
vanilla WoW.
Yeah, and so that's so them bringing it back. It's like, okay, but it was good. So
yeah,
there are people who never played. So everybody says it's nostalgia, but there's people who never played it that are having fun.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I approached that like without rose tinted glasses. Like I played vanilla like when it was first out, and I'm like, but I came to him like, yes, I have rose tinted glasses for these reasons, but I don't get me wrong, if it's mechanically clunky, it's gonna be mechanically clunky. And I'm like, no, I'm having fun with this. I'm playing a warrior, which was not like the most excellent experience in the world. So
okay, and then while we're looking back, if you could do anything to the new player experience, rebuild anything within the trial, within the ARR and Heavensward, what would you change about kind of onboarding players?
I genuinely believe so. MSQ related, I think there's two things that solve 98% of all the real problems with A Realm Reborn, and I think to an extent actually would really behoove Heavensward, and that is quintuple, 10 times more voice acting. Like just go back in and every scene you can just put in voice acting. And also, I mean, I would redo the voices for ARR with current, voices.
Get the hell out.
I know some people like certain voices from ARR, but I like that. I really
How
do
you
think
handle that with like Heavensward, for example, with Edmond.
Yeah, so the thing is, I don't think most of the scenes that I don't think you have to worry about that because I don't think you need to voice everything. If we're just thinking about like realistically, but I think you could. A great example, the fireside scene with Ysael and Estinian, which is an incredibly emotional scene, an incredibly pivotal scene for Estinian and his recognition of the reality of the lies of his nation, and also that he must still partake in his duty, is not voiced. Or the entirety of 2.1 is just not voiced, like an entire patch, just no voice acting. So I think there's like a lot of places that would work. The other thing I would do is create a normal version of Binding Coils. That would do so much. Beyond that, I think the game needs to be better beyond just the Adventurers Guild training thing, tutorial thing, for explaining and conveying certain concepts. So like one thing that I don't know how this is me saying that it would help to fix, but I don't know how the hell they fix this, is like most people don't understand positionals because there's really no reason to do positionals or like anything that's teaching you to do positionals until you're in effectively 8-man content that's like raiding or trials. And the thing is that at that point it's hard to learn something new, especially if it's not teaching you to do it and no one's telling you to do it. So but like in what single player you can't do positionals, so it's like I don't know how they solve that.
Yeah, if the game had been built from the ground up to be like a trust party always, and so when you were running around by yourself, you were running around with an open world trust, then you being a DPS, you would have had a tank. But the game functions so differently. It functions so differently when you're by yourself than when it does. Like as a black mage, you're not going to do some big AoE pull out in the world in the way that a tank pulling, you're like, this is fun. I'm so glad they grouped all that up. Now I'm going to melt it. It's just different.
Yep.
So there's definitely like a gap there. I'm glad they integrated the dungeons into the story. It kind of drove me nuts that I just cleared Dragonflight and like it didn't force me to do any of the dungeons, and that doesn't feel good. Especially knowing that the Exile's Reach proved they could do a trust system. So like they've said they can't do it for current content, but like if you can build a Mythic Plus version of stuff that didn't have Mythic Plus back then, like they brought back a Pandaria dungeon, and they brought it and they're bringing it into the Mythic Plus. It's like if you can manipulate these dungeons in that way and tune them, then you can definitely go create an Exiles Reach version, and you can preserve that to be an extension of the story. And it's only weird because it is a game that feels like it set up the first raid. I ended the story and I was like, that's it? And it's like, no, because the last bit of the story is locked behind the raid. So they're perfectly capable of using instance content as narrative storytelling devices, but they didn't use dungeons. And 14 did. And so that is a chance where, like, as they've redone dungeons, like, I think Toto Rock is better. And so they are getting a chance to teach us, but the Hall of the kind of mediocre would be really nice to kind of pick up where Hall of Novice left off and say, okay, so you've got the super basics, but can we make sure that you're breaking a combo to get into a stack marker? Because that's kind of important. Just breaking an action. Like, not breaking a combo because they've made it so easy to, like, maintain your combo, but, like, stop what you're doing, get to the stack. Like, you have to get to the stack. Stop what you're doing, get out of the bad. You have to get out of the bad. It will kill you.
Death is a DPS loss.
And so, like, it just, like, when my XIV analytics is telling me maybe die less, like, that's a big one. Maybe don't die. Maybe try that strategy. We could just not die, and then the boss could die, and then it would be over. I agree with that. That's something where the gap between a player who's just done 500 hours of story and a player who's raiding could be really, really large. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. And there's no manual tool to make sure that gap doesn't appear. How do you rebuild back up to the tension of Shadowbringers or Endwalker? Like, that took 10 years. How do we get there?
I think you realize that the strength of Shadowbringers and Endwalker is not only in the builds to them. I mean, like, a lot of the strength comes in also the reveals and momentous moments, but I think partly it's that Ishikawa's writing really focuses on character. I think you see it even when her writing around the Dark Knight, the rogue quests, her writing in the Steppe in Stormblood. And so I think the focus, the thing you do is you make sure that you make a really good story centered around characters, and then you build up to a large conflict that you have a really good sense for. So, you know, the thing is that they were still finding the Ascians and a lot of the conflict around what they intended to be this story arc for as they were going along. But they did have the sense of, we know Zodiark, we know Hydaelyn, we know Ascians, we know. And so I think what they did is they figured out a couple key elements, and then they built up mystery surrounding them. And then they made you care about characters and the world as a whole, and kept that moving forwards till you kept being engaged in different situations that made you give a crap more and more and more. And then paid that off. And you both, so I think the key really is just make a good story, make 7.0 a good story that has tension, has conflict, has stakes, but is also moving us forward into a brave new world, because we are moving forward into a world post Hydaelyn, post Zodiark, post, you know, like, what is a world that is defined just by the children of Hydaelyn? You know, when we don't have Midi looking after us, we don't have Hydaelyn looking after us, it's on us. Like, we, you know, the Mist of the Realm is about being like, why the 12 don't have our back, like, why they care about us, but why they are not able to, like, why they're, you know, non-interventionist. And so I think the easiest thing to do, I think the two easy things to do is you build up either to a threat that comes from the Sea of Stars. So you a extra planar threat in terms of another star, or you build up to a threat that comes from another reflection, because there's a tragedy and an irony in that.
So do we need to bring back other forms of story? Like, do class quests need to come back, or can, like, Tataru's Grand Endeavor and role quests and stuff kind of fill that void? Do we need more canvas, as it were, right? If the main story is your unavoidable portion, you're distilled down, but there's all this supplemental, do we need more supplemental material, or is there enough here?
I think supplemental really helps build, right? I'm a big fan of it, but I think the thing is the role quests can do a lot. Like, you think about how much the role quests increase, you know, connection both with the areas they're referencing, but also characters. So you think about the healer with Fordola, you think about the way in which you feel Doma's pain and also build up Hien and Gosetsu with the range DPS and Endwalker. You think about Fortunel in the final role quest, or and the relationship between Charlian and Garlemald. So I think that you can do a lot with role quests just alone. I think the thing about job quests that's hard is I think you saw by the end of a lot of them, they just didn't have any more runway of anything they needed to hit on. Like you end up having the last two, your Capstone and your Stormblood quests for Paladin are just gladiator quests.
And I know that there are people who adamantly
you have other ones that are amazing. You have ones like
people,
Scholar, Red Mage, Dark Knight that just carry it all the way through. So, but I guess the thing is that if you don't have the benefit of you're learning your job arts from someone else in terms of growing in strength or power, what is a narrative around a job that is a job narrative, but also isn't, you don't have to worry about having a mentor in any real capacity. And I don't know how that manifests, but two role excuse me, 2 role quests for each role or something to broaden the scope, or more Tatar's Grand Endeavors, or more, things like Baja or Eureka, but maybe without even a Baja or Eureka zone, right? That level of think about the beginning where you see the Bajan incident with Sid. Maybe something like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's as I go back through the class quests, because I'm coming back through the game, I've done all the class quests through Heavensward. I'm missing the Stormblood ones and the Capstone. And then I didn't finish all the role quests in Shadowbringers, and I haven't really touched role quests in Endwalker. I'm just going to do it straight through. Doing those as I go, what I was more hopeful for from the Shadowbringers role quest, that I ended up not engaging in the Endwalker ones at all, is I was really hopeful that that would become a mandatory training platform, that was kind of that Hall of the Novice you were talking about.
Some do.
And some feel like I'm forced to respect some of the class mechanics, and some don't. So it starts to kind of feel like WoW's Mage Tower, where some of them were really tightly tuned, and some of them weren't. And I would love to have maybe extreme versions of that, and have extreme role quest things. I would love to have an extreme version of the story as a whole. If New Game Plus could have an extreme version, and then you just try achievements and titles to it, I would love to go back through the story and do all the single player scenarios, and imagine the finale of Endwalker, but hard. Those type moments, whether you liked that moment or not, that fight could have been better. And I think what felt really lackluster about it was how, by that point, the gear that I was in, it was okay, dude. It just didn't feel as tense as it could have. And so if they were going to bring anything back as supplemental material, I would also like to see it mechanically relevant. And that can have a story mode. They've gotten really good at, if you die to something, it says, do you want to do this on easy mode? I appreciate that. I think that making that lore accessible to somebody who's, doesn't want to be, or is not able to become mechanically capable in a reasonable amount of time, that's fine. Let's not lock that away. But it would be really nice to be able to play the game on a harder difficulty, if we're going to go back to telling story. Because one of the things I really struggle with story quests is, from an immersion standpoint, these are supposed to be the best ever. And then because I've been leveling the way I have, I'm trying to do stories in one go. And so a lot of times I'm in full poetics gear. And so I just smash these guys. Yep. And so they're you'll never beat me. And I'm boom, boom. And then they just fall over. And that just takes away so much. And so we're supposed to be these saviors of the realm, and we're still learning from somebody that we can beat up in 2 or 3 hits. So if they do bring it back, I hope it's in a way that can maybe start to take on a little bit of that Masked Carnival or Palace of the Dead, or something where being alone doesn't mean easy. Being alone can absolutely still mean there's a challenge, because that's what I think the class quests have really struggled with. Tatar's Grand Endeavor has felt like that thing you asked for, that just nothing burger. And so people who just like that, it's felt overly chill to me.
It is. It's very much just more chill lore story. Here, have a fun time.
I don't know how you fix that. Maybe that's what it's for, but I have not looked forward to it, which is fine. Not all content needs to be for all people. Island Sanctuary is not my gig, but I think it's super important to the game, and I really hope they continue to support it long term, because people are loving it. And so how do you deal with, would you up the stakes on Tataru?
It's hard because I think what's a good litmus test, right, is we look at that scene in Endwalker when you're I mean, I'm assuming spoilers are okay, by the way. I've been
this whole thing.
Yeah.
We've been talking about Meracydia, New World.
Yeah. So with that scene where your body transplanted, if you remember, like the first couple of days that was out, it was much harder than it is currently. So I played it was much harder, and then I replayed it recently. I was like, oh, they made it a lot easier. And the thing is, a lot of people were really struggling. I loved it when it was hard.
I
was like,
I failed once,
perfect,
and I had to go back through.
You should feel like it's hard. You're not in your body. You're like, it felt totally perfect.
It actually made me mad at the cutscene after that because I felt like I struggled through it, and I kind of wanted there to be a cost. Like, can you imagine if you struggled through it and then it said you weren't fast enough and somebody died?
Oh, the writing headache that would cause. But
they die no matter what. They die no matter what. Even if you one-shot it, just kill somebody off. Like, can you? Like, I just thought, what if the first major Scion death of Endwalker, of many, I was hoping there'd be many, is at our own hand?
I have very specific taste around this. So here's what I would say. That's the thing is, I was convinced that's what was gonna happen.
Oh yeah.
So like the subversion of that not happening, I actually enjoy. Like, not because like, oh, I'm happy someone lived. I was just like, that was a really cool subversion. Only because to me, they earned it by rooting it in. Oh, these people who know us are paying attention, and they're like, that's not him. Like that they figured it out, and you can see it on their face.
Graha could have been there. Graha could have walked up to us and said, "This is not you," and then, boom, giant pig hammer to the face, and that's it. And Graha's done. No backpack in 6.3. He's done.
And everyone riots.
He's gone.
Everyone riots. No,
gone.
You don't do that with Graha. He's been there for all of 5 minutes. You do that with Y'shtola or Urianger or Thancred.
You can't kill Y'shtola. You can't kill Y'shtola because she always comes back 2 scenes later. Like, it's just a set dressing. Like, when you build a Final Fantasy XIV expansion, you write 40 hours worth of story, you put in leveling dungeons, you put in a couple of endgame dungeons, there's 2 trials, one early on, one midway, then one after the end that'll get the extreme and the point one.
Go.
And then you say, okay, where along the way is Y'shtola gonna die and immediately come back?
When she dies, no one's gonna believe it. No one's like,
die.
just like, she dies in 7.0, and they're like, nah, 7.1, she'll be back.
She won't die. She'll be back.
Imagine, she's gonna go lip.
Imagine if Ultima Thule, imagine if they'd all died and then we brought them back in the 0.5. This whole time we thought they died.
Okay.
Because I didn't even get a chance to think they died, because I played it through in one sitting.
But here's I'm the worst to talk about this, but I will say, like, to me, the whole point of that scene is not at all about whether they live or die, because literally you're told before you even go, here's this magic. And also, hey, this magic will bring them back. You're explicitly told by Y'shtola.
But don't do it. You're told Iron Man logic, but don't. You can, but don't.
And so the thing is that all that matters in that scene is your friends trusting in you and believing you'll find a way. Not knowing if they're right, but having faith in you and you getting to the point that you can bring them back. So to me, it was never a psych out because they were always very clear about it. You know?
I think Thancred should have been lost. And I think that every time you hear that male voice singing in that zone, you should be thinking of Thancred. And he's just gone. And he's gone. And he really didn't come back. Because everybody else we got to say goodbye to, and then we brought them back. But we just woke up. And that was it. And he was ripped away. And I think there's, like, video games are a chance to tackle really hard stuff and go through that emotions. And, like, if anybody who's ever lost a family member suddenly and unpredictably, like, this is a chance to tackle that in a low-stakes environment, in a video game, where ultimately, at the end of the day, none of it matters. And so, like, the lesson learned is, and it all works out. And it all works out. Like, and everything's fine, and it didn't cost anything, and it's good. And, like, that's... I don't know.
Generally, I'm with you. Here's the thing, is like the Endwalker is a very unique case where generally I'd be making the exact same point, but because of the narrative around what Endwalker ends up being about around nihilism and around like the profession of faith, not because there is value inherently, but because we choose to forge it and make it, that ending and the way they do it works for me. I realize it's not everyone's cup of tea, but like in general, I'm with you. When they first did non-MO, I was like, oh fucking come on. But to be fair, they ended up earning like not only non-MO still being alive by doing things in Stormblood patch content and all sorts of stuff that I think Ul'dah is a lot more interesting and better for ultimately. But you know, the other example is like Gosetsu no Yotsuyu. I was like, oh fucking come on. And then they fucking earned it being meaningful. So with 4.3, and with Gosetsu's story and the tragedy of continuing to live after feeling your duty is complete. And they also talk about end up doing this in the role quest as well and getting on that. But hey, I have my druthers.
It's fun to have a game that we can care this much about, but
yeah.
there are definitely things that I think each one of us maybe would have done differently. There's a handful that believe the game is in perfection, but I don't think those people are on the dev team. I think the dev team themselves feel that there's definitely choices we've made, that those were the choices then, and they were the best choices out of the information we had at the time. But in hindsight, maybe it could have turned out a little different. So it's a long road to get back to where we're having this level of discussion in 12.0.
Absolutely.
It's a long road to be this level of passion and have people around still doing that, whether it's us or somebody else. But as kind of last time you were here, I had you sum up coils. And this time I would like to see, how would you sum up Hildibrand to somebody who has either maybe just realized they want to do the relic and they're just going to skip through it, or somebody who's just picking up the game and they're watching people do all this crap and they're like, what am I looking at? What is the Hildibrand story from when it starts in, I guess, going into 2.0, when they first revealed it, through now, 6.2?
Well, I mean, technically it's even 1.0. Like, there's a whole Hildibrand.
Yeah, they like built it because it was supposed to be testing facial rigging, and then they thought, we'll never do that again. And people were like, please do it again.
So I haven't done ARR in Heavensward Hildibrand in a long time, but I mean, broadly, it is what would happen if you ever watch a Japanese game show. What would happen if you combined a Mystery of the Week television show with a Japanese game show and Sherlock and Johnny Bravo? It's like, it is just, what if they let the dev team spend all the money they wanted to go as ridiculous as they wanted, as hardcore as they possibly could? Like, if you think any aspect of the MSQ is silly, that is the most chill part of the Hildibrand story. Hildibrand, like the most recent one, ended up with the man flying on a rocket from the moon to Earth and an aliens taking him away, and also there were Loporrits twerking, and oh my lord, look, just Hildibrand's not for everyone. But if you have ever laughed at anything in Final Fantasy XIV, I cannot recommend enough that you at least try Hildibrand, because it is a trip. It's a lot of dialogue, it's a lot of humor. You really need to not only not take it seriously, but also not question some of the lore implications that are a byproduct of it, because there is actual important lore information in it, but also there's other things that make you go, oh god, how do I reconcile this? Jesus Christ. But I don't have a good way to shortly encapsulate it. I would recommend Eorzean Archons have done a lovely recap of it. If you that was a good if you want a summary or a like sort of getting into thing. The Aram Reborn one is basically in 1.0, the ended Hildibrand with Hildibrand basically going up to stop Dalamud flying up into the air, and no one knew what happened to him. In 2.0, you find him as having forgot all his memory and pretending to be a zombie. And then that goes on a full mystery that involves his parents and Frying Pan and the traitor's spurn of Sildi and Ul'dah and all sorts of nonsense. And then in Heavensward, he gets a child. And then in Stormblood, he dresses in drag. And then in Shadowbringers, he becomes a Sin Eater, but not really. And then in Endwalker, again, twerking Loporrits. Does that help? Is that useful?
It does. It does. It's a ridiculous thing, and then making it mandatory is really bold. Previous relics have had mandatory content. They have had mandatory content, but not like this. This is different.
No.
And it's a lot. It's a lot. The ARR stuff is long. There's bioweapons in there. There's zombies. There's
it's a lot of cutscenes. It's a lot of dialogue boxes.
The trials to it are super fun. Super fun.
Yes.
Green Chicken's a hero. Well, that was everything that I wanted to talk about. What are you working on right now? We finished early.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Right now I'm working on a sort of a Sildy video or a Sildy Subterrane video, just going through each of the routes and talking about all the lore for each one. So I got to put that out. I always start off thinking I'm going to do something that's slightly off the cuff, and then I end up writing a whole 20,000 word script, and me walking down every inch and explaining why Hecdies would show up in the cisterns of Sildy and all sorts of nonsense.
I went on a whole tirade when we first got into Foundation about the architectural statements that were being made as we started to prepare to see the relationship with the church and kind of the citizenry, and like there's just a lot of metaphor in the way it's laid out, and the fact that they would like live above the cathedral. There's like this whole section up there that's not available to the populace. Like I just went off on a whole thing, and so I can't imagine how deep it would get if I was actually like a good writer. When you actually like start to structure a paragraph, and like, because mine was like wall to wall, top to bottom, no spaces, like slam this thing. I was making margins smaller because it was like, how much information can I get onto the page? Because that's how they graded us. One of my professors literally put a point next to every time you stated a fact correctly, and you just had to get to enough points. He was like, I'm expecting 260 points in this paper.
That seems healthy.
That's not. So when you write scripts for this lore stuff, you say 20,000 words. Like, are those bullet points? Are you writing out an essay that could be consumed? Like, because you guys also run a website.
Yeah. So a lot of times what I write out is pretty close to what ends up in the videos. So it can vary. The thing is like I could go in and just stream me walking through every part of Sildy and mention all these things and go da-da-da-da. But the thing is like I have, for some problematic reason, an obsession with like making things nice and produced. And so I could like spend 3 hours talking about it, or I could make a 1 hour, really condensed, all the same information, but really well presented, clear, concise with sections and yada, yada, yada. So part of it, what it is mostly just like me taking all the information that's in my head and correlating the contents of my brain into a thing that is more akin to a film than a stream of consciousness, really. And it is, it's not really bullet points. Usually it's what it is literally like, okay, here's what I'm going to say. Like it's the totality of it to prevent me doing impromptu just doing this. Just so it's like if I want to just do this, I'll just go do this. But if otherwise I like basically write out exactly what I plan to say. That way I can also go into my recording booth that I built and like, do inflection, do like, presentation, like have, if there's a joke, I can time the joke and I can like give it the right rhythm. So it's pretty much, I would say it's basically, if you watch a video, the script version of that is not word for word, but pretty much that.
Okay. Well, touche. I've tried going down that road. I am not good at it. It's not a skill set I possess.
Definitely had to learn.
It would be something that would have a huge growth curve for me. Well, on that note, I'm going to go nerd out about a spreadsheet for the rest of the day.
Ooh, exciting. Moogle Tomestones, I hear?
Moogle Tomestones. I want to know everything about Moogle Tomestones from when they first launched in 2019 to now.
Nice.
And
did they only start in 2019?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't realize they must have started like right when I started then. I started within a Tomestone event.
Yeah, the very first Moogle Tomestone event was the Hunt for Philosophy, May 30th of 2019, going into Shadowbringers.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
We did not get them for every patch since. We got Moogle Tomestones for... we did not get it for 5.1. We did for 5.2 and 3. We did not for 5.4. We did for 0.5. We also got one that lingered. Pageantry just lingered out there loosely for 0.55. And then we got one leading into Endwalker, and we've gotten one for the main patch every time in Endwalker. That seems to be the new pattern. They are historically 29 days out from a patch unless there's a patch delay or unless they're going into like an expansion or something like that. But even the expansion one, we got one, the Hunt for Lore going into Endwalker was 45 days out, and Endwalker was delayed by 14 days. And so that gets it right back down at that roughly 29-day mark. And then they're usually announced right at a week before. They're usually announced, so 36 days out. So that's what gives me January 10th for 6.3. They have not confirmed that date, but that's what tells me that.
But it makes sense.
Second live letter is historically 11 days before a patch, so that would put that as December 30th if they stick to it. If they stick to it. We'll see if they stick to it, but that's kind of the historic trend with where things fall. That kicks us out to Ultimate being end of January, the half patch being in March, and then 0.4 being probably, my guess is May 23rd.
Good stuff.
So
can I just say thank you for like doing the analytical breakdown, all this stuff. I've looked at it when you've done it for like the patch cadence and stuff like that, and it's been very fascinating to look at. I've always wanted to sit down and do it, but I just never had the time. So appreciate it. It's
been a nerdy thing. We've had some nerdy streams. My spreadsheets aren't pretty, but I do enjoy building them, and I built a lot of analytical tools in various jobs I've had. And
with your capacity for this like analytical, the data analytics, like, why are you not more in like, why aren't you doing more lore stuff? Because I feel like you could consolidate so much of that information within your brain.
Like, simply put, because I get really mad. Like, simply put, I get really angry because then I start to ask why the game does something a certain way. So like in Limsa Lominsa, they drink rum, and rum is made from sugar. It could be beet sugar or things like that. And if it was made from honey, it would typically be a mead. If it was made from, and like, so when we look at the amount of references to the alcohol they drink in Vilbrand, there is no evidence that the alcohol in Vilbrand comes from Vilbrand crops, but there are Vilbrand crops. They do have like Bacchus wine, but that's not what the everyday poor person would drink. And so when you think of like a poor person who's on the lower income range in Limsa, there would be an alcohol available. Just like in the United States, there's Coors Light and there's cheap, Kentucky Deluxe.
E1
and
confirms
like
that.
And so there would be these things, and like the crop representation doesn't line up with what people drink in various places. So when they reference these alcohols, it doesn't line up. Not to mention the only reliable source of honey is in the Shroud. That's the only commercial bee farm we know of. That's the only one we know of. And so like, I just start to get really nitpicky. So
interesting. Yeah, I typically use Garland tools, but I mean, Garland tools is a pain for searching quest text. You can't control F it.
Yeah, you can't control F everything that Gamerscape has. Like, they have a ridiculous database. You can do a lot with their search tools, but it's slow and it's meaty because it's designed to help you find one specific piece of honey, not how many times was honey referenced overall. That's not really what the tool was built to do. And if it was, like, how would you monetize it? Like, it's a very expensive site to run. It's why they sell a subscription in case you want it to be ad-free, because they have to run ads. And so, like, I can have things like this running on my machine, because I don't have to pay for server hosting fees. So like, it gets a lot easier.
And all of 2.0's MSQ written out by hand.
So I have it all typed here. So what it is like, as I'm getting into lore, I really enjoyed people who are really analytical. Like, I enjoyed watching Pyromancer do lore. And he wrote all these notes down in a notebook.
Yes. And
the entire time I kept asking, that's really cool. I mailed him a notebook. We got these grid paper notebooks as part of the media tour, and I didn't know what to do with mine. And like, I live in a small house, I don't need junk piled around, and so I mailed it to Pyromancer. I was like, yeah, because he was saying on stream, I'm gonna run out of notebooks, and I was like, have one. So he has an Endwalker notebook. He didn't like those grid paper, but cool notebook to have. So I mailed that off to him. My whole question the whole time was, I think it's really cool that he's handwriting, and there's something very like, it feels good to handwrite. I handwrote notes in college and always felt like it stayed in my brain better. But then I had to go back and transcribe those into a computer, because a computer can search things. A computer can tag things. A computer can organize thoughts and reference thoughts in a way that physical paper, pen and paper, just can't. And so I said, if I was ever going to get super into lore in this game, I'm going to start building spreadsheets. I'm going to start building taggable documents, because if I'm going to do this, if I'm really going to do this, I want to go through and reference this. And what I'm finding is that projects, that already sounds like an immense project. It's actually bigger than that, because what I found is this is not good enough. You also need all the out of text, the paratext, You need to know all the Koji interviews. Every time Yoshi P's been asked something about lore in a fan fest Q&A where some random person got on a microphone and said, "How old is the Warrior of Light?" And then you have to have all of that, because this game is a living document, and it's not just the lore books and the in-game text that gets you there. This 12,500 pages is a start, not an end point. And so
you're doing the 12's
get
work
there, but it's hard. And then the question is, how do you do it beyond a hobby? Like, I'm doing it as a hobby, and like I'm a full-time content creator around Final Fantasy 14, and I don't know how to monetize this. There's no way. And like, I don't mean that from like a selfish, like, how do I make my millions? Just how do I pay myself minimum wage for the time?
Rationalize the time. Yeah.
That's
a hard thing to do. Although I have to imagine there's enough people who are into lore and content creation, or stuff around that I feel like you could find a way to at least not if monetize it particularly. You'd still be able to like probably get something off of it. I know I'd pay money for that.
And then the question is, do you have the right to, right? So if you go create a website that takes everybody else's interviews, that's on their website, that is generating ad revenue for them, and then you compile all that and distribute it for money, the word infringement comes to mind. Like if you make a YouTube summary of here's 10 interviews and here's links to those 10 interviews, and let me take what they all and let me distill it down, that's a service, and that deserves to be compensated. But if you just say, here is copy pasta, everything that is out there, peruse at I'm going to just be a library.
Yeah. So do you have to go transcribe all of the Animus, interviews with Koji from like 2011 or like just all
Absolutely.
There's.
And that way you can answer questions, right? So Kevin said, like, do you think there's going to be a time skip between now and 7.0?
If there was gonna be one, it was gonna be at 6.0. I mean, like, Yoshi P keeps hinting at something big, but like, man, if there was gonna be, it was gonna be at 6.0. The problem is, at some point, they're gonna have to contend with like the time bubble just like being not making full sense. Like they set up the Elzen kids, right? They like keep hinting at, they're like, hey, they're not 20 yet because we know that like Elzen at the latest that they have their growth spurt is like around 20. They reference that. Like, they keep nodding at things that are about age, and it's like, okay, you either trying very much to give us an idea that some certain amount of time hasn't passed, or you're alluding to something you're setting up for. So I don't even know. The other thing is, I don't know if it'd be a traditional time skip. So here's the other thing. Like, what happens if the twins got lost going into another reflection and they come back and it's been 10 years for them, but in their physical bodies this time, not their spiritual bodies, because the reflections aren't co-synchronous the same way the first and the source have become. Like what if there's a non-conventional time?
And that is where I would love to go reference every time they've been asked a question about time skips. Because they've been asked questions about time a bunch of times. And like, their view on time, if it hasn't changed, the way they've communicated about it has. Right? So sometimes you say something one way, and somebody asks another time and you say it differently. And people are like, well, you changed your mind. And you're like, I didn't change my mind. I use different words. And so if you start to put those together, you can get a really cohesive picture of like, okay, over here I thought you were being really aggressive. Over here I thought you were being really passive. It seems like you're being somewhere in between. Seeing those in context of each other matters. This is really
and translation.
And translation's really hard. Koji's really a blessing in that way, because we get the direct English. But from Yoshi P, we don't. And so that's something that translation's a big one. And so like, that becomes really heated around big lore concepts, things like time, but also around like actual gameplay mechanics, things like add-ons. Yep. When everybody says that some new statement is a new statement and it's a shift, as I've gone back and tried to look up old interviews, it's not a shift. They've said it a little differently each time, but their views have largely been aligned from back before 2.0 came online, how they felt about add-ons. It hasn't changed.
I mean, I feel like the fundamental worry is...
And there will be questions about add-ons. The next Ultimate race will get here, and there will be questions about add-ons. These questions will keep coming up, but their views have not changed. They will keep responding to each situation contextually from the same original point of view. And the question is, do they respect time and other lore components the same way?
Well, I mean, it's such a headache for them, though, to like, if they, once they codify it. But at some point, even if it's like, when 14, like, it's at the same place that 11 is, right? And they, like, effectively then decide to codify it then. Like, at some point, they're going to have to.
Yeah, they say many moons and things like that. And it just, like, and we know how long a moon is. And so There have definitely been times where you start to get that, but like, unless you're gonna have a history book that is your reference material that has dates and stuff all pre-written out, and you're just gonna slowly trickle to the player base out of the lore, you're gonna basically have narrative writers writing from. It would have to act like nonfiction. You would have to have a nonfiction autobiography that's boring. That's just a set of like census data and all these things in a world that has real physics and all that. And you would just have to have this like scientist historian that could be a reference that is literally always thinking of everything. And then you're writing events that took place in it. That's the only way. That way, anytime you want to go back and say, hey, tide is changing. Is there any reason tide would change? And then you go, let me look. And no. And so like you would have to have somebody that acts as the big be all end all. And
to be fair, Oda is stepping back into a much more of a supervisory role. I mean, that's one of the reasons it seems like we're getting Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 3 is so, like maybe if now there was a time, Oda could be that person since he doesn't seem like he's going to be doing any of the writing or any of the other stuff that he was doing before.
Just be a fact checker. Just be the great be all end all.
I mean, he's effectively kind of been that so far.
Eorzea is in their head. Because it has to be a real place. If you don't want to run into issues, it has to be a real place. Like, we can sit here and say it's just a game, but if you, like, if we can nerd out at all, somebody can nerd out too much. And the moment somebody can nerd out too much, they're gonna find the discrepancy. So your options, your options are perfect or not at all. You have to be perfect. Because if you're anything but perfect, then we immediately have to suspend disbelief. And if I can suspend a little disbelief, why not suspend all of it?
Well, I guess, but like, I mean, there's already an inherent suspension of disbelief in population density because we know, like, repeatedly that the population of the city-states is supposed to be much greater than what we see in the game mechanically.
I kind of treat that like Warhammer treats it. So I don't know if you're familiar with Warhammer as a game. But,
I'm loosely. I don't know how Warhammer treats it.
So when you play Warhammer on the table, those are battles that really played out. Like, that's how they kind of deal with the headcanon. And so those battles took place, and they were just one of the countless battles. And so you were playing through these countless battles. But on the table, an orc is representative of a lot more orcs than a space marine is of space marines.
Yes.
And so you are seeing a metaphorical representation. And so when you see a couple of village people talking like this, that is a general sentiment on behalf of many people that might live in Limsa. You have to put that in. Now, the question is, the moment is, how far do you then take that? Because if you really expand on it, the city needs to be a great deal bigger, and we need to have places we can't go that are full residential districts, and then all the map doesn't make sense anymore. So you have to decide, like, how far do you want to follow, how hard do you want to tug on that string? Because the whole thing could unravel. So because otherwise it feels like the Truman Show. Like, it's all staged there for our benefit.
Yes. No, and I guess for me, like, I have a very easy time with that level of suspending for, like, okay, there are points at which I have to suspend certain things because of requirements and mechanics, like, or, certain mechanical things don't make sense in lore, or like potentially, like, if you choose to use them as evidence for lore, make a lot of things like really wonky. So to me, it's like, there are certain things where, like, yeah, I could just, like, game limitations, imagine bigger, like,
I take everything in game as a canon representation of how the system works. So I assume that if grapes can grow in a region, that there are grapes coming from that region. I don't have to go in and count the grapes on those vines, unless there's something funny there, like a game theorist video that's a nice conspiracy. But, like, in reality, how much wine is produced in Loshna, we don't know. But we do know that grapes grow in the region, and that there have been substantial wineries in the past. And so, like, I take it all as canon. And like, that starts to be weird stuff. Like, when you start, even just that, when you start to go look at the fishing log, when you start to go look at rivers that weren't there pre-calamity, the fact that those rivers have names, but then they're not charted correctly, it's like, well, who named them? And then they're saying, like, oh, it's all this, like, the rogue river is about all the, like, it's because there's all this contraband going up and down it, but it didn't exist pre-calamity. So then the question is, how much contraband was coming down? Like, it hasn't been that long since the calamity. So for it to have the name, like, a restaurant opened up last week and you're like, that's the murder restaurant. You're like, what happened there? Like, I have huge questions.
I mean, you see that with, like, the Hammerlea. Like the Hammerlea is named after the hammers that are pounding it flat, but those are new in Western Thanalan. So yeah, no, that's true for quite a few things.
So I don't know. Canon gets hard, and you wonder why I don't nerd out about stuff like this. I will tell you, like,
now I understand. It would drive you insane. Good.
When I worked in medical sales, like, my colleagues thought I was nuts. Like when I said, and I'm like, well, I just used my spreadsheet and like tomorrow's, and I put a score on it. And so I was like, well, I'm excited because tomorrow I had 2 appointments line up. And so my route tomorrow has a 4.8 score. And it's like, that's just a really efficient day. And it just feels really good to have a day that's that efficient. Last week I had to have a 1.3. And so I just felt kind of behind. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like I like gamifying things. I like nerding things. I like optimizing things. And when it comes to lore in games, that's a really dangerous thread to pull, because not everything I've learned about Final Fantasy has made me like the game more. Some of it has made me really frustrated with the game in a way that when I got to just be ignorant, I wasn't. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. They shouldn't have done this like this. There are things about the game I like a lot deeper, and I'm a lot happier, and I'm a lot more connected to the world. So I'm really thankful for those.
Yeah,
but they're not all positives.
Yeah. I guess I think I have I get a lot out of just like figuring out solutions within the confines of like the box that I've been given, even if the box is full of pieces that sometimes don't fit together perfectly. And so because of that, I'm driving less insane. But no, I hear you. It all fits together now. I get it.
I don't want to start a puzzle if we don't have all the pieces. Don't do that. Don't do it. Well, cool. Well, this has been fun. Yeah. I'm going to go nerd out about spreadsheets and Moogle tomestones.
Sounds good.
Let you get back to your day.
Sounds good. It's been a lovely conversation, man.
All right.
See you around.